Around 2016, people started to talk about the cartoon community on YouTube. Although it is technically a fandom, it has groups that share the same beliefs, mentalities, backgrounds, and goals, and those circles of fans are closely knit together that you may as well treat the fandom as such. Fast forward to today, and we're still seeing problems with the cartoon fandom, with worse situations and people getting angry and disappointed towards the sphere. You'll hear bad stories about the fandom every day now. People were just getting disenfranchised from the community, and some were trying to understand why the fandom is like this. This is one of my attempts to explain the fandom, as I've been a witness of the community since 2014, so I have been part of the fandom long enough to understand it from the inside out. It is not going to be an easy and short journey, as I don't think a single video will be enough to tackle all of it. Let's look at the fandom from what it actually is, from how it acts, how it reacts, how it was formed, and how it would morph into the future. One issue that you don't see being talked in the current internet discourse is that it doesn't say about the whys of everything that happened here. You see internet videos about the harshness of the fandom, their tastes, behaviors, and people, and they simply just don't ask why is this fandom acting in those specific ways, or where did all of this come from. There is a nasty habit of not really seeing the past, and to be honest, I think that's because their past is not that well documented. You don't see many people talk about the 2000s now, the decade where changes are the biggest, maybe bigger than what happened in the 2020s. The double O's was the decade that would define the cartoon community's formative years, the decade that would be traumatic enough to follow them in the 2010s in both films and series. Let's explore a bit what the fandom thought about that decade, and it's not pretty to them. The 2000s was not a good decade for animation. While there was the rise of Pixar and 3D, Disney was not going well, as its 2D films were being flops after flops, and eventually, the company abandoned 2D, which didn't start on the right foot. As for series, there was a gradual decline of memorable cartoons in that decade, which wasn't as obvious as it looks. However, the idea of the 2000s not being good, sometimes awful, was solidified in the creation of CNReal, a live-action blog that was so universally hated that some of their shows became lost media. This is how every cartoon fan in the new 10s would tell you how it was like being in the 2000s. If you ask them to rank the three decades, the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s, they would put the 2000s as the lowest. They are happy for that decade to be over. Many YouTube videos were talking about how the new 10s give fresh stuff for the industry, and how Adventure Time was the spark that started the cartoon renaissance. Also, there was also the discourse over how Disney entered into its second renaissance. And I did notice the parallels. Successful films after a decade of stagnation, box office successes, and the return to dominance in Hollywood, especially now. All of this is compared to the 2000s. It's clear that the 2000s was becoming an obscure decade, sometimes forgotten in the discourse. Their shows are only starting to be given a smaller light just now, and their shows are sometimes just being framed as hidden gems, or in the Do You Remember series from that YouTuber. People in the new 10s all agreed that the new 10s was a better decade when talking about the Cartoon Network, Disney, series or films. There was a video about the top 10 worst cartoons of the 2000s, and it cited that the quality of cartoons in general dropped. It's a popular video that people used to watch it at the time, so there was a common agreement. Disney was also being treated as an outdated product, ready to be replaced by the new rivals. It's clear that the people in the fandom want that decade to be forgotten, to be free from the 2000s, even though it is an important decade for them too specifically. The 2000s had the seeds that will be the main core of the cartoon community's mind. The show Johnny Test is an important show to talk about because the way the fandom treated is similar to when they treated Teen Titans Go. This is one of the connecting tissues alongside modern SpongeBob. You see in the new 10s the complaint about why some networks are spamming the same show over and over, and their complaint started with Johnny Test, as this series was also being spammed in the 2000s and also the new 10s. There was a video talking about even though some of our good shows ended, this one will remain. Does that sound familiar? CNReal was so hated that it was used as Cartoon Network's lowest point. When you look at the videos about the history of Cartoon Network, this was used as such. They don't want another CNReal, and the mentality of the 2010s was from the goal to remove anything related to it. Those are small seeds, but the biggest seed is the death of 2D Hollywood films. It was such a big event that we are still seeing the damages that it caused till this day. Back in the 2000s, the fandom reacted negatively to that event. You can still see some DeviantArt journals saying how sad they are. It was like the end of the world, a medium cut from the industry. It was so bad that Disney's next film was hated when it came out. It's only after 20 years that people started to see the film on a brighter light, disconnected from its original context. This caused the fandom to pray for the return of hand-drawn animation over and over. The Princess and the Frog was one of the times the fandom thought that it was the comeback of 2D. Whenever some headlines talked about Disney considering bringing 2D back, the fandom eats really good. Those articles are coming back again and again and again without much happening. Some pilots were able to market themselves as some of the saviors of 2D animation. The discussion of bringing hand-drawn animation back never ends, as even in the 2020s, we're still seeing multiple videos about the death of 2D. In short, you can say thank you to the 2000s for where you are now. You came here because of this. Did you notice that every headlines about bringing 2D back tended to have Disney Renaissance characters or film? The history of the fandom is the history of the 90s kids. They took 90s things like the hand-drawn animation or 90s cartoons for granted, which means that when they saw the rise of CN Reels or old cartoons be cancelled or the fall of 2D, it was a sign that the 90s were gone. The reason why I consider the 90s kids to be the primary group is because they were old enough to use the internet. There was that narrative of being a 90s kid, being born in, let's say, 1995, then growing up as a teenager in the 2000s, and thinking that cartoons are now cringe or that you grow out of it, only to come back in the 2010s. That's a sentiment that I found here online. One thing to note is that the internet of today is a bit aggressive, but also similar to today. The people on the web, especially forums, are aggressive and drama hungry. They would cause flame wars over petty things and different opinions. Sometimes they would just try and backstab one another if that's entertaining enough. Just like how one react negatively to Teen Titans Go, the old internet had that too. There was a forum ranting about CN Real and how kids are missing out on such good cartoons from the past, for example. You still see those people now, actually. The main difference is on the scale. Internet forums are niche and you need to actually go there by yourself. This is compared to now where everybody is on one or two apps. Basically, the people of yesterday are the same as today, it's just they are on a bigger and visible platform. Although the bad stuff is what the fandom remembers the most of the good stuff is being latched into. Avatar The Last Airbender was a cartoon successful enough that the fandom craved for the next Avatar, the next big cartoon of the decade. In that field of not so great cartoons, this show stuck the most. As for film, Pixar is the big studio that took over Disney's throne, which ironically lost it to Disney with the release of Cars 2. One thing to remember is that what happened in the 2000s was very recent. Less time happened between Chicken Little and Tangled compared to Tangled and Zootopia 2. Less time happened between Out of Jimmy's Head and Adventure Time than Adventure Time and Hazbin Hotel. So whenever you listen to videos from 15 years ago, you are seeing people who just came out of a suffocating fog. Entering into new tens was like waking up from a dream and feeling shocked and sometimes on an acid trip. Wait, cartoons are good now? How is it possible? I didn't grow out of cartoons. Animation is not just for kids and we can actually take animation as a medium seriously? What a gorgeous concept! This is the feeling that's being presented on the internet. The Double O's was for many an existential moment where they thought that they were too old to watch animation, growing out of it, and if it wasn't because of the new 10s, they would be stayed in that mindset. Or they would have thought that animation would be stigmatized as kid stuff if it wasn't because of the new animation renaissance. The contrast between 2008 and 2012 was insane. The reason why I talk about that decade is that no fandom comes in a vacuum. The fandom is reactive towards their environment, and said environment was harsh enough for the community to become harsh in response. You don't see comments like, "This era is worse than the Snyder era" out of nowhere, or talk about the history of Disney without talking about the 2000s. You don't see videos talking about the death of 2D animation without talking about Shrek. This decade is too important, and to avoid it means removing the explanation of how the fandom was formed. And to be honest, our decade is experiencing similar issues, like the fall of Disney, just like in the 2000s with Shrek and Pixar, companies investing and planning on to make AI films and series, and also both decades having strikes and recessions. But the 2020s is having it worse. When I was living in the new 10s, I knew that the new animation golden age wouldn't last forever, that we'll be back into that phase of filling an empty void, feeling like the new 10s will be considered the new 90s. I see people mourning about how Gen Alpha is missing out on such cartoons and all that stuff. People are behaving like how people acted in the 2000s, but on a major scale. In short, understanding the 2000s is understanding our present time, as the similarities are way too visible to ignore. If there's one thing that you should retain from this video, is that everything that you think about the cartoon community stemmed from the events from the 2000s, from the good but especially the bad stuff. I didn't know the extent of how bad it was living back then, but seeing the 2020s, I can at least understand if there's someone feeling that everything is worse now. I don't know if it will be the final response to our traumatic current events, but I know what behaviors and mentalities were solidified in the 2010s.